Good evening, everyone. This is Prashant Sengar, welcoming you all on behalf of the Open Source Society, UNA. Hope you all are safe, healthy, and doing well during these unprecedented times. If you are attending this event, chances are that you have already used at least one open source software in maybe VLC Media Player, Firefox browser, GIMP, the photo editor, Python, the programming language, or maybe Blender. And I'm sure that most of you must be using Android as the operating system of their smartphones. So the beauty of open source software is that it allows everyone to view, modify, and improve that software. Imagine using an operating system that has your own code. Yes, you can do that. So how do you start with contributing? And how do you really contribute to an open source software? We organized Opening Up Open Source to answer this question. Open Source Society UNA is a student-driven organization from, but not limited to, Indian Institute of Information Technology, UNA. It is committed to promoting open source culture among students. Today's webinar will feature 3 talks, which will walk you through the process of starting contributing to open source software. In the next 7 days, we all will be working together through Hacktoberfest and on our repositories. Don't worry, if you are unfamiliar with any of these terms, we have got you covered. You will get to know about them in some time. We will start with a talk by our main speaker and chief guest, Ayush Jain. He will speak about his story with open source and what he considers essential while contributing. It will be followed up by a Q&A session by Jan, so keep the questions coming in the chat. Following this, we will have Utkarsh Singh, who will tell you about the basics of open source, Hacktoberfest, and walk you through the process of contributing using Git and Github. He will also tell you about the opportunities in open source. Next on the list is MLH fellow Ayush Jain, who will be talking about the nuances in open source and how should you be contributing during this Hacktoberfest. Before I give the stage to Jan, let me introduce him. Jan is an open source developer and is an active member of a number of open source communities. He is the co-founder of Nextcloud, which is similar to Dropbox or Google Drive, but lets you store your data at a server of your choice with added privacy and security features. With the new features added, Nextcloud is now more close in functionality to the whole Google suite. He also co-founded the community of open source design for pushing more open design processes. Terms of services didn't read, creates the terms and conditions of various programs for you so that you don't have to read them. Of course, you already don't. He's also a diversity advocate and part of various projects like Africa Hack Trip, Speaker and many other societies. He also contributes to Elementary OS. We are all honored to have you here, Jan. I'll present this audience to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone at home. Thanks a lot, Prashant, for inviting me and introducing. And I also hope that every one of you at home are safe as well. Here in Berlin, also the cases are rising. So I'm staying home too. Hope you're all safe and staying safe. Today I'll tell basically a bit of my journey in open source and how I started. So because Prashant now also introduced me with like a lot of projects that I'm involved in or that I'm contributing to, and it's important to understand that this is like through all the years that I've been contributing, right? This hasn't come like all at one point. I mean, I myself also started as a student with the whole thing roughly 12 years ago now, and so it's all these projects are community efforts. So basically, none of them is only me, and so I think the very first thing, or also the most important thing, is the value of community and collaboration. And with that, I would start. Prashant, can you put the screen share on air? Cool. Okay, so I'm doing a presentation in Firefox, our all favorites open source tool. So I'll just show you like a bit of the steps. What I did, how I get into open source. The first thing basically for me, as far as I remember, was Wikipedia. Might have been the same for lots of you. So I remember in school, back in school, when teachers were, or when Wikipedia was kind of starting, and teachers were like, "Oh yeah, you can't use that for actual work. Like it's totally unreviewed and everything." And look where Wikipedia is now, right? It's like the biggest encyclopedia. It's like the biggest open knowledge project in the world. It's like, I think, the 5th most visited site in the world. So this is really the power of community, and this is like I watched it through that whole time, and it's really cool to see. And I also sometimes edit on Wikipedia, and it's like really a cool feeling to be part of that. So this is actually also like one of the first things that you can be involved in open source, that you can just edit Wikipedia, right? It's as simple as that, essentially. You sign up for an account, edit a grammar error, or you add some things to your favorite site or something like that. So that's very simple, very, very small barrier to entry. And then a step where I really got involved into open source was, I remember when a friend showed me about Ubuntu. And back then Ubuntu looked kind of like this, right? This I don't know if you remember that. I certainly don't really. When Ubuntu was this orange, brownish design, the old design basically, and I was like, oh, okay, nice, is interesting. It's an open source operating system. I was using Windows at the time, and then I really remember when I then read a blog post about their new design, and suddenly it looked like this, right? And I was really, and this also, now of course it looks a bit outdated and everything, right? It doesn't look super fresh anymore, but I was at the time it was impressive. I was really impressed. I was like, wow, they must have like a cool design team. They must really invest time in design, and this from an open source project. So I was really interested in that, because I was also doing basically during school and during studies, I was kind of doing design stuff, like I designed posters, and I played, for example, I played in a band, and we did like our own website design and stuff like this. So I already had like the design angle, and so it looked really cool that they actually had a sense of design in this open source project. Because that made me feel that it's not only about developers, but it's also about like how easy it is to use. And so, but in the first place, I got involved in Ubuntu a bit, or I started getting involved just with translations, basically, or not just, but like something that was not design. So that I think is very easy to get involved in generally, right? So maybe some of you already translated projects. There's like a lot of platforms which make this easy for open source projects now, and I think maybe the later talks might also go into that. And so one of the things that I did was, as the part of the Ubuntu translators team, is create this huge table of like different standard translations. So here you can see the words, different words like account and add-on and address and whatever. And here how the different platforms translate it. So like Ubuntu, Debian, GNOME, KDE, XFCE, and Cinnamon even. So and I started this list just to collect the different translations and how we can unify it basically. And so this was already like a kind of a super involved way of contributing, right? Of like seeing through all the different projects and coordinating that. So that was like super interesting. And that was one of the first bigger things that I contributed in open source, I would say. And then a bit later, I got, well, with the whole design thing, I got more interested in contributing with design actually, because I saw that it was possible to contribute also design. Like initially it felt a bit scary, of course, right? Because this will be used by everyone, and like if you kind of have one word translated wrongly, it's not such a big deal maybe, but if there's a design issue, everyone will see it and stuff. But it's not so scary after all. So one thing that I got involved in is the GNOME community. So yeah, probably or maybe you know it already. GNOME is also the interface of Ubuntu, and it's also what I'm using right now or still now. And at the time, they moved from GNOME 2 to GNOME 3, and this is GNOME 3, right? And I looked at it and I really liked the direction that it was going. So, I went to a conference of theirs, the Guadec conference, and this was actually my first open source conference. I think it was in 2010. So yeah, pretty much 10 years ago. And I was so impressed by their work, by their informed design work, and really how they were reasoning about design and how they were documenting and how good it actually looked, how it could rival macOS and Windows. And so that was really impressive to me. So this is a community that I got involved in, and where I'm still friends with basically today, and where we also then going forward with Nextcloud collaborated a bunch with. Yeah. So basically, yeah. One of the other important learnings, I would say, is that it's important to see and find a project, identify a project that you really like, that you really use and you really like to use, and see where you can help there, or maybe also what you can learn from them and what you can give back. So that I think, especially in case of GNOME, was the case for me. And then another project that I would say maybe my first project that I started was during 2009 or 2010 maybe, was this, and it's still online. It's called Libre Projects, and it still basically almost looks like it looked at the start. So sorry about the design at the moment, but it basically is a list, of, as it says, open source hosted web services, right? So I wanted to kind of bring together. I saw a lack of a really easy way to find these things, to easily find things which are open source, which are hosted and ready to use, and which are also easy to use. So there were lists on the FSFE Free Software Foundation website, or Free Software Foundation Europe, or on Wikipedia. There was kind of, I don't know, they didn't have logos, they didn't have images, and it wasn't really so findable. So here, then we try to do this list of hey, Wikipedia, Nextcloud, Diaspora, OpenStreetMap, Jamendo, this music site, Public Library of Science, and you see there's stuff broken and stuff. But this was really a thing where I saw this is missing. And maybe nowadays, you know sites like, for example, Prison Break and also privacytools.io, which are quite similar, and which, if I remember correctly, came after this, because this need is really, I think more people also saw this need, that we need a proper entryway to look at projects. And so this I consider it's really very simple, because you just list the projects, but it has a huge impact, because it actually helps people to figure out what to contribute to, what to use. And so still really happy about the project. It's not so relevant anymore, but it definitely was a big factor in what I did. And you will see that reflected, the style of site, you will see that reflected later in stuff that I'm going to show as well. Then one other really important event for me was a conference of Students for Free Culture. And this, of course, I think is also very relevant for you, because essentially this is a Students for Open Source or Students for Free Culture meeting. So this is, or used to be an organization which was basically, it was a thing of Creative Commons, the open source media licenses. And they did a conference in 2011 in New York City, and I was privileged enough to get invited to that. And I met a lot of cool people there, for example, who were working on Diaspora, the open source social network, if you know that. And it was really, really interesting to see. So this was another event, just like the GNOME event, that was really cool to be at, and really cool to meet the people, you know, because it's always nice to communicate with whoever is working in these spaces. And so, yeah, we were talking about it just before the meeting started, that now, due to the COVID situation, it is a pretty bad situation, but also the good part about it is that events like these become a bit more democratic, basically, or a bit more egalitarian, where everyone of us can join, no matter where we are in the world, and we don't have to travel places. So that is pretty cool as well. Because back then, yeah, online events weren't really so much of a thing, and you kind of just had to travel there. So yeah, but this also, it doesn't really exist anymore, unfortunately. But this was really a really interesting event. So I think, yeah, going to these events and finding like-minded people is a really important thing. So this is another big learning from that I had, yeah, from these events, basically. And then, so because there I was studying, or I was concluding my studies. I studied information design, which is, yeah, basically how to design stuff so it's simply to use. And I then handed in my thesis, which is called Usability in Free Software. So there I really focused on how to make open source and free software usable. And I used these learnings from GNOME and Ubuntu and everything to write this. And yeah, this was really also an interesting thing, because it allowed me to also, again, give back to the community with knowledge that I have from my field, from the design field, what I was studying, to give back to a community where I saw design was a bit more lacking at the time. Yeah? And nowadays, I mean, it's still a bit behind the proprietary services like Google and Facebook and whatever, but it's getting better. And yeah, that's why it's important that yeah, to not only look at open source from a viewpoint of developers, but also from what you, with your background, can give back to it. Because yeah, absolutely you can, like whichever background you have. It's just a question how and in which way. So then another interesting project that I was involved in, or that was basically my first job, which was directly open source, is this thing called Unhosted, where we worked on an open protocol which made sure that data is stored under your control. Right? So this was basically the anti-Google, anti-Facebook, anti-Amazon at the time, basically. And it was like this little hacky project at the time. So the general concept is like that normally you have a web application and it owns the data, right? And our concept was, well, you have a web application, but you bring your own data. So this is the significant difference. And for that, for example, we were funded through DuckDuckGo, for example, so made a few new connections. So that was really interesting to also see this, like this whole funding process, and how to actually be sustainable with open source software. And we also got a funding from this NLNet Foundation, which is a Dutch foundation which funds open source. And yeah, so because oftentimes people say, oh, open source software or free software is free, like how do you make money with it? Well, it being non-profit doesn't mean that you don't make money, right? Or that you can't pay your rent, right? It's a matter of, yeah, how much you do make and how much profit you make. So yeah, always depends. Yeah, and so what was also very funny is, because the project is called Unhosted, we actually found a little village, like accidentally when we were searching online. We found a little village in the Czech Republic which was called Unhost. Yeah? So we decided to travel there actually, because it was such a similar name, and that's where this photo happened. So yeah, this is me, and these are my colleagues at the project back then. And we came there with our printed T-shirts, and we even visited the mayor, like just for fun, you know. So and that was just like a super fun experience. And yeah, also yeah, don't be afraid to do like stupid stuff or random things like these, right? It's always very funny, and at the very least, it was like kind of a weekend vacation to go to a place where we would otherwise never have been. yeah, and we went there actually 2 or 3 more times, and yeah, got to know people a bit. So that was, yeah, very funny actually. Yeah, and then the next thing is basically, yeah, one of the most defining things, I would say, for me personally, because it was the first OwnCloud sprint. And yeah, OwnCloud, you might know, is the previous name of Nextcloud before we forked. And this was basically the first event, yeah, or the first sprint, the first hack event, the first collaboration event for OwnCloud, or what became Nextcloud. So yeah, April 15th, 2011 was the year. And so here you see I mean, we also, the photo doesn't also get bigger. So yeah, we don't have better quality pictures, I think. So that's pretty funny. And we worked on, you see, so this is me sketching like interface stuff. So we were 5 people just working on the stuff. And there again, it was, the way I found it is because I was, at the time, I was studying, right, or I was about to finish my studies, and I saw that I was using Dropbox, right, where everyone was using Dropbox for collaboration, the design students. And I wanted to look at something else, right? If there's like an open source solution. And I saw on the mailing list of the GNOME project, and there I saw some initiative towards that. And then also on the mailing list of the KDE project, which is another desktop project, I saw an initiative about that. And I wanted to I kind of communicated between the two, right? Or I wanted to kind of bring them together. Yeah, again, the collaboration aspect, which I think is very important. And then I saw that OwnCloud, which was on the kind of more active on the KDE mailing list, they announced this first event, and it happened to be in the same city, Stuttgart, in southern Germany, where I was actually studying. So I was thinking, oh wow, yeah, that's easy enough. I'm just gonna go there. And so yeah, there we were 5 people, and yeah, as you see there, much like just sitting together on a table, like a little hackathon style, or like sitting together and working on it. And it was such an enjoyable event. Yeah, really was cool, and learned a lot, taught me a lot. And yeah, I'm still working at Nextcloud, so that was really a defining thing, I would say. So yeah, be on the lookout for things that you want to happen, right? And that you want to basically bring together, or where you see things missing, and then see where these things happen, like be it in an online meeting, in an in-person meeting, yeah, wherever that happens. And yeah, of course, nowadays we have Nextcloud. We forked from OwnCloud in 2016, and yeah, we're as active as ever, and have a lot more things than just file sync and share, like video chat, calendars, and everything. So basically the full Google replacement. So yeah, check it out if you like, or if you need an alternative to Google services. Then another project that was actually born out of the unhosted project that Prashant also mentioned is terms of service didn't read. So something that we saw was that well, terms of service were really not understandable, and so we did this initiative to rate and label website terms from A to E. Yeah, so as is like either like how do you say it? Like school grades, yeah, or like warning labels. So here, for example, of course, you see Facebook's very bad, it's class E. Google is like class C. Wikipedia is quite good, but class B, and so on. And so this is like a very educational site, and this also for me meant that we have a way to simply show people, like in a very simple way, thumbs up, thumbs down, right? Green to red and whatever, A to E, to show people what is, to make it understandable, what is trustworthy and what is not. Yeah. So this is a very exciting thing in that regard. So it started with like with 3 people of us. So I was a designer there, or I'm a designer there, then a programmer, also the one from unhosted, and then a person who understands law. Yeah. So here it's important. Yeah, get the right people, find the right people for the project, and then just do it basically. So And then other community people came. We did a browser extension, right? And then even DuckDuckGo. Here, if you see it in the you probably don't see the popover, but there's the what is called this is the DuckDuckGo Privacy Essentials extension, and there they actually have the privacy practices from terms of service didn't read, so they even integrate that in their service, and that is like super cool. So again, the collaboration aspect is amazing, right? I really enjoy that. And then something also more unusual that we did, it's an Africa hack trip where we went to four East African countries, and we visited the communities there, the open source and hacking communities, because we read that it's like kind of booming, yeah. And we were thinking, well, we don't actually know some people from there, so we wanted to know them better and want to make sure that we collaborate. So at a very eye-to-eye level, we organized these events together with them. And we also only recently released, but there's a documentary if you're interested more about this, about what we did. And so we organized these events here, and it was super fun. So if one of you ever gets the opportunity to do that or wants to do that, I can really just recommend that to visit other communities. I mean, be they in a different country, be they in a different continent, or just a different kind of community. Like if you're a developer, be they designers, right? To just break down the barriers between what is perceived as different groups, but basically are not really, right? We're all working on cool stuff and all working on trying to improving certain things in our life. So I think that's a really important learning I had from there. And then, so the last three projects, and then I'm basically done. Then we can go to questions. One big thing is open source design. So this is a community of designers and also developers, and we just aim to connect among each other, because this was basically born out of us going to different conferences of WordPress or Mozilla or Wikipedia or Ubuntu and so on, and seeing, well, each of these projects has a design team, but we're not really talking among each other, right? We don't really know each other, and that's a problem, because oftentimes a project only has one designer, or only one person doing a certain thing, and then it feels very alone. So what we did was like this group, this collective, bringing together all these people, and we put up events. We organize open source design tracks at FOSDEM in Europe, at FOSS Asia in Singapore, at events in the US, at events in Europe. We write a bunch of articles. We have this job board, for example. If you're a designer, or if you're design inclined and you want to contribute, for example, we have this job board. Or if you have an open source project and you need, for example, a logo, you can post it here. So this is something that is very popular, and we also, of course, have a forum for communication. So I would say this is again very similar to this Libre project from earlier, where it's mostly about bringing together the people and the projects. And pointing them out, like, for example, the resources here. So probably also relevant for you, like, where can you get open source icons? Where can you get open source fonts? Where can you get open source images? And so on, right? Design tools like, as Prashant mentioned, Blender, GIMP, and so on, right? Where can you get all these things? I remember as a student also, the fellow students always were like, oh, where can we get this typeface? Where can we download it for free? And there's all these really free and really actually open source licensed resources to use. So this is a great resource, especially for students, I think. And then also very similar project, but kind of different. It's open source diversity. So this is again very much in the vein of Libre projects. Also, it's a site to bring together and collect initiatives for more diversity and inclusion in free and open source software. So because traditionally open source software is kind of like a white male dominated field, right? Like it's very Euro or US centric. So I'm very happy about this event actually, that we can fix this issue actually. Yeah, this website aims to also do that. So we're listing a bunch of these projects which help with that. So some things which actually might be relevant for you are some of these platforms which list issues for first-time contributors. So there's a bunch of these actually. So first-timers only, your first pull request, or issues which are up for grabs, or first contributions. Probably they're going to be mentioned in the later talks as well. Yeah, which help you get started with your first contributions. And then also further projects, like for example, a project that aims to write more women biographies on Wikipedia, because there's a gender difference in that, or gender bias actually, and a lot more, like a Wheelmap project that focuses on accessible or accessibility info for OpenStreetMap, for example. So yeah, lots of these different projects, and this is kind of bringing them together. So yeah, maybe you know some of these projects, maybe some of them are relevant for you, and yeah, this is again really cool to yeah, a really cool thing to collect all of these. And also here we have a forum and we have a Telegram group. So if you're interested in this, please come join. It's like a kind of a, yeah, it's open for everyone. And so now I come to my last point before the Q&A. Is yeah, the project where Prashant and I actually met, and why I'm here today is Keep or Sweep. So it's kind of a fun project again, or very funny little project, at least I think so. It's it's basically kind of a, well, maybe you know Tinder, right, where you swipe right and left if you like a person or not. And this is basically Tinder for your own data. Yeah, so you get your pictures or your own data, your own files shown, and then you decide, do you want to keep them or do you want to actually delete it? So in this case, a photo, and you can press keep or delete. Yeah? So this is this kind of a hack also against monopolies, right? Against data monopolies, against companies who amass your data, who yeah, like Twitter, for example, wants to have you tweet all the time, of course, right? And so it's not intended. Yeah? This is this kind of minimalism thing where it helps you delete stuff and keep your life clean a bit. And so a cool thing here, I think, is that for me personally, this is a project where I learned a lot, or I'm still learning a lot, because we're integrating all these different services. For example, we have a Twitter version where you can connect your Twitter account, and then it shows you your own tweets, and you can decide if you still want to keep your tweet, or like that certain tweet, or you want to delete it. It's yeah, this in this super funny way. There was this person who did a keep or delete bookmarks extension for Firefox, and there's plenty other things that we have planned. So also, if you want to get involved, I mean, there's plenty of things that we want to do. And one really funny thing that I learned through this was hardware hacking. So for example, I built this big button for pressing keep or sweep, yeah, physically. And I also wrote this documentation while I was doing it so that other people could do it. So I get this like huge alarm button from the web and ordered it. And it actually only has this tiny microcontroller in it, which is basically a keyboard which only sends one command, right? It only sends the command for the keep button, it's a space bar, and for the delete, it's just a delete key. So very simple actually, but I was so overjoyed with doing this, right, and hacking this. And this is a friend trying it out live with the two buttons and with the application. So and this is just personally for me, even though this was I think 1 or 2 years ago when I did this, where I was like already a lot in open source and in tech, it was still like this super nice sense of achievement, right, and this a super cool project, which I think, and yeah, where Prashant then also contributed at some point, and that's very cool, where we can meet people who live on the other side of the globe. So and then you do get to do events together. So that's just what I enjoy a lot about open source, and that basically concludes the talk part of my talk. So if you have any questions or remarks, please share. Thank you.
It was an awesome experience talking to you, Jan.
Thank you.
There were a few questions that were asked by a few friends of mine, and I had a few questions of mine as well. So why did you decide to keep continuing to open source? Maybe because you started while in college, while maybe you thought it was fun and it was like meeting new people.
Yeah.
So why did you? You could have just switched to some big organization or maybe worked on something else. But why did you keep continuing in open source?
So that's a really good question, because I guess it depends on each person individually, right? So I can say for myself, for example, that I was always more of a do-it-yourself kind of person, right? I was active in a playing in a music band, yeah, or doing stuff myself already during school, like before studies, and so it was just kind of a natural progression. So also I was kind of like more alternative, I would say. Like I was one of the people who, like, which in Germany is not very usual. Like I was going barefoot to university, for example. So maybe a bit odd or something, right? And I didn't need at the time, or in general, I also didn't need like a lot of money to live. So I had my expenses low. So the first thing that the first project that I worked on, we actually paid us ourselves an open salary from these donations, and it was something that we could live off. And so, but also at the same time, of course, I was privileged enough to have these opportunities directly out of university, right? Both unhosted and an own cloud at the time, or Nextcloud, were basically things where, well, Nextcloud very soon the company was started, like I don't know, half a year after my studies were concluded. And initially I didn't work there, but then I could switch there. So I think it really depends on the project. But if you use your time, the studies time, for example, to figure out a project where you could see yourself working, I think, or like going forward, I think that's really valuable, because during studies, you of course have a little bit more freedom. So I think that's really important to use that in general. Yeah.
And we also know that you are a minimalist, so maybe it also comes from that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
There is a question in the chat that one of the main problems while contributing to open source is that maybe I'm not good enough. So how did you overcome this problem, which everyone encounters in the early stages?
Yeah. So that is a super good question. I mean, really, I'm struggling with that still, you know, like literally before events, or before launching a new project, or before changing, I always have the feeling, oh, actually, am I the right person to do this? Like, for example, for open source diversity, right? I was always thinking, oh, wait, like, but I'm this white guy, yeah, like, why am I, like, I'm not the person who should do this, right? But then you need to think about ways where it actually benefits, you know, like in general, for example, for this project specifically, I'm keeping more in the background, right? So it's not like, it's important that you do, well, how can I say that? Well, just do it, you know, like if you're in doubt, you can just do it and you see what happens, right? I mean, I'm sure you thought the same when you were contributing to Keep or Sweep, right? You're thinking like, what will they think? And like, will my pull request be accepted and so on? If you just do it, they're going to tell you, like the people in the project are going to tell you, hey, either they're going to tell you, oh, wow, awesome contribution, let's merge it, or, it's cool, but there's like a few issues there, and so you learn, right? And so either, like, you can only win, yeah? Of course, there's also some projects which might have like, where maybe there's only one maintainer and they're either busy or maybe they're even aggressive, which in that case, I would avoid these projects. It's as simple as that. It's unfortunate, but it happens. But in general, I think it can only be a learning experience.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience while I was working with you.
Yeah, cool. same here, basically.
Yes, there was one main question that comes up really, that why do we even have open source, and is it all related to one single organization, or maybe it is about different communities?
Yeah. Well, so this is really a really big philosophical question, I would say, right? It's a really good question, because, I mean, of course, there's the open source initiative and there's the Free Software Foundation and all these things, but the general idea is more than that, right? It's an idea of sharing things sharing knowledge, yeah, and of so, for example, the idea of licensing or of patents, for example, is a rather new one. Yeah, copyright is not something that existed for all through humanity, right? It's a rather recent thing. Like it's like, I don't know, 100 or 150 years old or whatever. So before that, everything could be used by anyone, basically. So open source is only needed because this changed. Yeah? And in the beginning, for example, all software was open source, because like all the universities shared it among each other, because the computers were the things that they made money with. So they were like, oh, we're selling the computers, so we might as well, or we can just share the software because it's easier to do. But then when they noticed, oh, this is another thing that we can make money with, we can slap a price tag on it and make it closed source. And that's actually another thing, because I say price tag, open source, of course, doesn't mean free, right? Open source, you can also make money with open source. So with Nextcloud, for example, it is open source, everyone can download it, but we're also a company and we make money with it through like support and subscriptions for big companies, right? So this is something that you can balance. Yeah.
And there's another question that do we have to be anti-closed source to be pro open source? And how do you, and there's a one personal question, do you only prefer to use open source softwares, or maybe you keep on using closed source software whose open source alternatives may still be there and good enough, but you still prefer to use the closed one?
Well, I mean, as many things in life, it's not just one thing or the other, right? So it's a very good question. I personally am more, I would say I am a bit of anti-closed source, right? Because I really think that collaboration is better than competition, and that I mean, if you look at Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, if you look at their design and their platform, they're essentially doing the same thing, right? Like so many things, so many projects are doing the exact same thing, and it's just so weird to me that that a lot of humanity's effort is wasted on this, right? On duplicating the same thing. But to the question, or more to the question, is, well, we also use closed source software, right? GitHub mostly, right? GitHub is a closed source software. And there comes in the factor of this network effect. If you know what that is, it's basically when you use a platform which has a lot of users, you get the benefit of these lots of users, right? And so when we started Nextcloud, our own cloud, GitLab, for example, didn't really exist, or good GitHub alternatives didn't really exist. So that's just what we went with, and it's something that that also oftentimes we have to how do you say, we have to justify. But well, it's one thing that we use. But generally, for example, I don't have a Google account. I don't have a Facebook account. I do have a Twitter account, though. So some things are just where I just say, well, I'm going to use that, and that's it. Yeah. So you don't have to be an extremist, basically. It's not either or. You're welcome either way.
There's another question that did you ever had the urge to leave open source? Like after working for so many years and contributing to open source, now you want to maybe work for a big organization that gives you some really good perks or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, oftentimes, you know, when I'm using Linux, right? I'm using Ubuntu with GNOME, and oftentimes when like the computer crashes or something doesn't work, I'm thinking like, I wish I would have a MacBook right now, you know? Or like when my Android phone like does something that it's bad, I'm thinking, I wish I would have an iPhone. But then I'm thinking like, well, first of all, like my partner, for example, she uses Apple devices, and I sometimes also try them out, and then there's often many of the same issues or different issues, you know. So I'm thinking, whatever. Yeah, every tech has its faults. And the other thing is, of course, that when you're on GitHub or on an issue tracker, communities can be, or especially online communication can be at parts a bit like direct or even aggressive. And there I was often also thinking, like, what do these people think? Like the people, you literally have people requesting features in a very aggressive manner, or what comes off as a very aggressive manner, and then oftentimes you need to take time out, right? Maybe you have a bad mood for the rest of the day, but the key thing here is that it's just like maybe a few people, and the important thing is that as a community, these people need to be like either warned or excluded, yeah, so that you end up with the good people, and also online communication is hard, yeah, so it's difficult to get stuff right. So we often use emojis to make stuff clear that it's meant friendly, and one other thing, that's why I love in-person events and also face-to-face events like this, because the communication is much easier.
Yeah. And we have another question from Shivam, that how do you read large code bases efficiently? Like he has been reading us the source code of an organization, and he has been very confused how to read that code base.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that's a good question, especially for me, because I'm not really a coder, right? And I also always have this problem. So what I generally do is, so for example, when I have something in the browser, what I often do is just inspect it, right? Right-click and inspect, and then you see what the classes are, or what the words are and stuff. Or in the case of Krita, where it's a desktop app, for example, what I would do is identify a specific thing that you would like to look into. So for example, I don't know the interface of Krita so well because I mostly use Inkscape, but I guess they have some, I don't know, filters, yeah, for example. So let's say you want to work on some filters or fix something there. You will, or you have a specific word that you're looking for, or an element that has a specific word. I would search through the code base for this word, yeah, or for this, I don't know, opacity, it might say, or like apply filter or whatever. So I would really look for that word and identify where, for example, a certain button is in the code, and then play around with it, you know, and see what it does, compile it, and so yeah, kind of like that. And really, I would say the inspector in a browser is really the easiest thing to get started with reading source code. Yeah.
Using the program is the easiest way to find what where you can contribute. And that's how I got to start contributing P4C.
Yeah.
We have another question, that how much of open source depends on the licenses? Can I call my program an open source program even if I don't use an open source license?
Yeah, so this is a good question, because this is also something that you often have on GitHub, where, for example, people upload their code on GitHub, and that's that, right? They just upload it there and they think it's open source. But that's actually technically not the case, because by default, everything is, because of copyright law, it varies from country to country, but in general, everything you create by your own, like whether it be a picture that you paint or software that you do, is copyrighted to you. And that means, depending on the country, it's copyrighted, can't be used by anyone else until the limit is often the author's death plus 70 years. Yeah, so long time, right? And so this is why we have Creative Commons. This is why we have the MIT license. This is why we have the AGPL, for example. So I would say no. Yeah, or the official open source definition is no, you can't. But you can also very easily license it open source. You basically just need to say it is MIT licensed, or it's Creative Commons licensed for use with attribution, or it's licensed under the AGPL. And yeah, one thing I would recommend is, because it's very confusing, all these licenses, what I always stick to is either the GNU AGPL, which Nextcloud is licensed under, for if you want people to license their modifications also open source, or the MIT license if you don't need them to be open source, the modifications. And for media, it's Creative Commons licenses, and for those specifically only the two, which are, one is the attribution license, which just means you can use it as long as you just mention my name, or the attribution share alike, which mentions that you can use it as long as you mention my name and your modifications are in public. There's some licenses, or are open source also. There's some licenses which have non-commercial clauses or no derivative clauses, and they're not really considered to be open source, because the problem with non-commercial is, like, when you, for example, have an image that you use on a blog somewhere, and you actually have like an advertisement somewhere, is that blog commercial or not? You don't really know, right? So I really recommend to avoid these other Creative Commons licenses and use only the two these two that I mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, there's another similar kind of question that how do I make money if anyone can sell my code? The first question is, can anyone sell my code if it is open source?
So that is a very good question, and I would say that's actually like a topic for like a whole another talk. Actually, like for a thing that my partner did for a workshop, I had also a list of like or I have a list of like different business models, right? So, for example, Wikipedia makes money through donations. Yeah, so donations is a business model, you could say. Yeah, you can ask for money on GitHub sponsors or Patreon, for example. Yeah. Or you can, I mean, anyone can sell your code, but not anyone will sell your code. You know, like for example, with Nextcloud, like we have like, first of all, very few people who can offer what we have, which is the expertise of all our developers, right? And the ability to quickly do changes and to do customer stuff. But also what you can do is, of course, you can, I mean, if you're then a bigger company or whatever, all these open source companies have partner programs, right? Where they limit the extent of which the name can be used, for example, because the name can still be a trademark, for example. So this is different for any project, but yeah, like WordPress, for example, has a service where you can sign up, and WordPress.com is of course the biggest instance where people sign up. Yeah, or Ghost.org, which is another blogging platform, right? They have signups, and anyone else can host it as well. But if you search for open source blogging platform or for Ghost blogging, then you will find their website, and that will be the thing that they find. So yeah, and what I would say is, if someone sells your code, team up with them, you know, like find out what they're like, find out if they want to contribute, and collaborate. Because maybe they know business and you don't, so they can actually help you.
That's also pretty handful for future prospects. And you have showed that you have worked in a lot of open source communities, and they have grown to a large extent right now. So how did you actually find, how did these communities actually grow so much? Did you do something special that maybe others don't do, or was it some luck or something else?
I mean, it's always, of course, some sort of, I don't know, you need to hit like the what other people also see as important. So to a certain extent, it's like maybe knowing what is important or seeing what is important to a community right now. But what I would say, what I deliberately always did in the projects that I'm working on is basically, like, especially open source design and open source diversity, we never made it about one person specifically or about like the founders of the project, you know, like you can say that on your own website that you're like whatever, the co-founder and whatever and blah, blah, blah. But on the website, I often see, like, for example, with open source design, very specific example, because we started that project in, I think, 2013 or something. And shortly after, there were also some other initiatives like which wanted to bring together design and open source. And they always were one-person initiatives. Yeah? So that was one mistake, I would say, that people generally maybe do. They do it alone, yeah. And then when you're, for example, when you finish your studies, you start a job, or your life situation changes, the project suddenly is inactive and it doesn't work anymore. Yeah. So that's of course a problem because it gets inactive. And the other thing is, oftentimes projects in the footer of the website have like, oh, this is a project by at person and at person, right? Brought to you by. Which is like kind of cool to add, of course, right? And I can understand the motivation. And on Libre projects, for example, we actually did that. Like we have, or actually we removed it. I'm just looking at it. Yeah, we had it in the beginning, right? But we actually did remove it, yeah? Because initially it did say like two of our names, but now we're just saying it's made by the Libre projects community, yeah? Or it is made by the that and that community. And this, I think, is really a signal to everyone that it's an open community and that everyone is welcome. And you need to and you need to be basically radically inclusive. Yeah, with Nextcloud, for example, everyone who's like doing like if they do at least 2 contributions, for example, we invite them to the GitHub organization. Yeah, so we're like aggressively inclusive, you could say. And this, I think, is really important to make people like I, for example, still remember vividly the point where I was invited to my first open source project. Yeah, I actually didn't, I forgot to mention it, but it was like a menu app for GNOME, yeah, like a different start menu, yeah. And I remember when this person invited me to the developer group, and I was like, whoa, I'm part of this now, right? So that's super exciting, and to just give that to people is so easy, yeah, but it means so much.
Right. And since you have worked in so many projects, do you set some criteria, some success criteria to keep working on it, to make sure that, to think that it has succeeded, it has reached a lot of people, or do you just work for the sake of, creating a project that it works for you?
Yeah, it really depends on the project. I would say for a project like open source design and open source diversity, my success criteria is that it, or one of the success criteria is that it works without me being there. Yeah, so as if I would like, if I have something else to do, or if I'm on vacation, or if I'm not so interested in the project anymore, it should work without me, you know? And this, I think, also ties in directly to the previous question of that it's so important to build a community about your open source project, because open source is, as much about community and communication as it is about the actual code. And so, that I would say is one success criteria. Another success criteria, you could say, of course, well, maybe it could be that you are featured on a certain blog that you like, which you can also like push by like mailing them, right? You can suggest your project. So, or like for example with Keep or Sweep, it's something that also a friend of mine and I, we were talking about having it like as an like featured in an art exhibition or whatever, right? Like a privacy focused art exhibition, which is also something that we still need to work on, because we haven't worked on it in some time now due to other obligations. But this is also something that would be cool. I mean, Prashant, we should also talk about that, right? But like to have this in like a context that is unusual, right? Or that is maybe a new thing. So it really depends on the project, and you set your own criteria. But I think always success criteria is great. Or like, for example, you want to have a talk about it. Like you want to make at some open source conference or at some conference, you want to give a talk about it. That could be like a great success criteria for yourself also.
And there's another question, and it's also related to a network effect. Can just people copy Nextcloud's code and run their own Nextcloud?
And I think also the question says and make similar company, right? As it's all open source. So yes, they can, right? That's the magic of open source. That's also the danger of open source, of course. But in practice, it doesn't really happen, or it happens to a limited extent, right? That's why I was saying, for example, we have this partner program where we have like accredited official partners who work with us, and it's much more attractive to work with us in this way than to copy the code, because like it's a huge project, and how can you possibly, like with a new company, how can you do that, right? It's much like, how can you maintain the software? It's much better to go to the person who originally did it and work with it, right? So just like WordPress and Drupal, for example, they do it very similarly. And so I would say the comparison might be to file sharing, like to illegal file downloading, versus Spotify or something like that, or Netflix maybe. You need to offer people a way that makes it simpler to achieve what they want, which is in this case maybe making money with your product, than just straight up like stealing it, if you want to call it stealing. But of course they could, right? It's all open source licensed. So
And there's another question about stealing code, that it's very prevalent nowadays to just pick up code from GitHub and present it as their own, and maybe even create whole great brands out of it without acknowledging the original creator. So how do you deal with that?
So I would say the importance there again is that you very early on build in a very active community, because if you already have like, I don't know, 2 or 3 people working on a specific project and it's already very active, and you have a certain presence, then this other project, like this, I don't know, a random person just picking the code and presenting it as their own, it doesn't really fly, you know, like it doesn't, it will like either other people who see it will let you know, hey, this person's copying and just acting as if it's their code. And I mean, first of all, they can copy the code, but they can't lie that it's their own idea, right? So that's just not cool. But then also you could go the way of like the friendly way of like approaching them if they don't want to collaborate. So it's a difficult thing, and I mean, people are very often worried about how do you call it, like theft of ideas, you know, like intellectual property theft. But in the end, we also need to realize that everyone has ideas, you know, and like everyone has ideas all the time, and everyone starts projects all the time. And like also, for example, like, I don't know, the light bulb was invented by several people at different places in different points of time, and only one dude gets credit for it now, which is like horrible, you know. So we need to realize that ideas are cheap, and projects are basically also what you make out of it. So what you make out of it should be like a great community, a welcoming community, so that literally your project has more value than just the software and the code that there is.
Yes, and there's this last question for you. I mean, you have been working on a lot of diversity-related projects. So, how did you get started on it, and why did you think of participating in such projects like Africa Hack Trip, or maybe even Speak and Learn? That's not even very related to you, but why did you think of joining them?
I mean, I guess it's because it's like, well, it's difficult to answer. I don't often think about it, but it's like a thing. It's definitely a thing of empathy, right? Like, for example, it goes back to like whatever, my childhood, for example, where like I live in a house with like my parents, my sister, and also my grandmother and my aunt, right? So apart from my dad, it's all women, right? Or apart from my dad and me, it's all women. So I could always like, it was like, for me, it was never like, oh, it was never such a division, you know, like it was never, like I didn't have, how do you say, preconceived notions about like what women can or can't do, for example, you know, and that's I think a very important thing from early on, and then also I mean, just reading online, for example, like about other people's experiences and about difficulties, and me myself realizing that I'm like super privileged, right? I grew up in Germany, which is like there's no natural disasters, right? There's like very, very little poverty and stuff like that. So this is really something which is important that, well, should be for everyone, for every human, right? I mean, it becomes very philosophical at this point, of course, but that's what it is. So it is definitely about how you want to live your life in a certain way. And then, of course, also specifically to open source, about just seeing that, well, this great initiative of like free knowledge and like knowledge for everyone and software for everyone, that it's dominated by a certain, I mean, it's dominated by white men from Central Europe and or the US. It's just kind of horrible, right? So there's these different statistics and talks also about how Wikipedia, for example, the articles and the biographies, for example, favor men and white men in science, for example, to such a disproportionate amount, right? And maybe when you look on I don't know, articles or YouTube or whatever, there's always like, yeah, I don't know, men scientists being featured and whatever, and it's just like not the truth. And so I think it's important to contribute to essentially like, yeah, making it right, or like setting the record straight for one thing, like the history, but also going forward to fix the problem. Because what we need to remember, the first computer scientists were mostly women. Yeah, the first programmers, which was unfortunately also born out of a how do you say, out of a he said like a preconceived notion, like out of discrimination, so to say, because it was said, well, with the typewriters, like women have like small fingers or fast fingers, so they can more easier type on the computers as well, which is of course bullshit. But it was that, yeah. And then at some point, marketing came and computer games were marketed, and then it was all about shooting and boys and whatever. So yeah, it's also just this times change, and yeah, and it's something we can do. We can change things as well. Every one of us can.
Okay, this wraps up the Q&A session. Thank you, Jan, for
Thank you
for joining us, and thank you for answering all these questions.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay, so next up we have Utkarsh Singh, who will talk about the basics of Git and GitHub, and tell you more about open source, more about Hacktoberfest, and will give you a demo of how you can actually contribute to open source. So, giving the stage to Utkarsh.
Hey everyone, that was a great talk by Jan. And looking at the questions that were asked, I think most of the people are familiar with Git. So I think without wasting some time, I will move forward to introducing you with certain basic principles. And fortunately, I haven't kept the talk focused to, going through a command by command workshop. So I'll be just focusing on certain concepts, and I'll talk about Hacktoberfest and other opportunities. So, okay, let's start. Is my screen visible right now, Prashant? Okay, I should just turn off this. Okay, so let's begin with Git. A lot of you are familiar with the concepts of Git, but I think we need to clear out our foundations of it, because just until recently I realized that Git is so much more than the 5 or 6 commands that we are familiar with, and to learn those we need to have a better understanding of our core concepts. So apart from this talk, I would also recommend you read the book of Pro Git ICM that is available on the website of Git. But here's a head start for that. So Git is basically a version control system, and it's a distributed version control system to facilitate team building, to facilitate programming collaboration in teams. And what it essentially does is it captures snapshots of each and every commit in any project. So when you save something, which is in Git terms a commit, what essentially is happening is it is saving the snapshot of the entire file subsystem that your project is. So let's take the example of a project that has 3 files. So in the first version, somebody created file A, file B, and file C, and they changed the file A and file C. So in the next commit, the A1 and C1 are new snapshots, but the B is simply a pointer to the previous index of file B. So of course there are a lot of optimizations in Git, and that's why it is so much more better than the other version control systems that are currently running. Some 3 most important areas of Git are the working directory, the staging area, and the history. Git directory that stores everything, basic commit history. So the working directory is basically the area where you make changes directly, real changes. Now when you have reached one point, you stage a change, and so now Git is tracking that change. When you have built a feature, or when you have finished your work, when you've reached a milestone, you can combine those tracked files and ask Git to take a snapshot of this subsystem and take it as one commit. So yes, and I suppose all of you are familiar with this. So a very visual representation of what I just said: git add, git commit, git reset, and checkout. So this was something basic about Git, and now let's come to Hacktoberfest. Yeah, not just a challenge for a T-shirt. The reason I'm saying that because, as most of you might be aware, that there's been a lot of flack at DigitalOcean and Hacktoberfest for having conducting a contest that is just pandering to a T-shirt, is making people, desperate for a T-shirt, and it's not really, it wasn't really helping open source. What people were doing was, I'll be honest, even I was doing it a couple of years ago, that I was just making branch PRs into my own repositories, and that's how I got those T-shirts. But just until last year, I realized that making actual quality contributions is really much more fun than just wearing a T-shirt. So yeah, I think I would request all of you to actually make quality PRs, and don't be afraid of that. You can all do it. And I would really recommend you to visit the link, the Hacktoberfest swag list, which I think will be shared on the chat box, because it's not just DigitalOcean and Intel that promote Hacktoberfest, promote this fest during this month of October. There are a number of companies that have put in their own fest, their own goodies, as an incentive for you to contribute. So there you have it. You already have a push. You already have a repository that you can learn, and you have a challenge, and you can actually earn more than one T-shirt, one goodie. So here's the essence of what Hacktoberfest really is. You just have to make 4 simple contributions to the world of open source anywhere, and don't piss off maintainers. And why? You get the T-shirt that's listed above. Why don't you piss off maintainers? This is the reason: spamming. So there's this guy called Shreyas, as you can see in this photo, and what he did is he made one simple contribution to a maintainer for a project, and he added the line "feel the magic" in a Python file. What the maintainer did was got pissed off, and he added the spam label, he closed the issue, and that participant, that contributor, was now disqualified from Hacktoberfest. Of course, I don't think that is very ruthless, actually, because it's not a contribution. It's not Hacktoberfest, because what is the open source contribution in this? This is really pandering to a T-shirt, and you're actually contributing, you're disturbing somebody else's commit history if you expect them to merge this into their own repository. So to counter these things, Hacktoberfest made up new rules this time, and this was that a PR, if it is not good and if it is just marked as spam by the maintainer and closed, it will disqualify the contributor, the person who made the PR, from the entire Hacktoberfest challenge. Now, it is not, although this looks very I don't know, frightening maybe for a new contributor, that if you contribute to somebody else's repository and they don't like it, you will forever be disqualified. But it is only for these weird and I don't know, silly contributions that people do that. Otherwise, the world of open source is pretty polite and really amazing and welcoming. And don't be afraid of this. If you really want to contribute, you will be welcomed. Even if it's just a small fix, even if you think that it's not that great, it's totally fine. But just make a contribution, make a fix, improve something. And only the repositories with the topic of Hacktoberfest can be used to contribute in the challenge. So you can search that on the GitHub website, or you can actually visit the Hacktoberfest website. They have made a list of all the popular repositories with the topic of Hacktoberfest. And your PR must be marked as Hacktoberfest accepted by the maintainer of the repository. So this is one. There are 3 new rules in addition to making four pull requests, four contributions to the world of open source. And yeah, so apart from Hacktoberfest, there are some real open source opportunities where you can actually, well, what do you say? You can actually earn something, or you can actually get something in return. Uh, and I mean, apart from experience is definitely a great deal. The best thing about open source is that you have a plethora of developers much more experienced than you, who are contributing or building their own projects, and you can contribute and learn from their code, their writing style. And I think it's way better than any course of programming. Okay, so there are some certain mentorship programs that many organizations who are really ahead in open source, who are really active in open source, host that encourage open source contributors. So one such mentorship program is LFN. It is, although it's a mentorship program, if you know what GSOC is, it is somewhat along the lines of that. You submit a proposal, you make a document listing out what you want to do in that organization, what project you want to make for them, and you talk about them. You must be active in the community of LFN, or if it's open mainframe, and when you submit the proposal, they'll evaluate it, and if they like it, if they think that you are good enough, they will take you in. It's a totally transparent way, because you first have to make your presence in the community, and once you have done that, you don't have anything to fear. There's no supposed interview, there's no supposed there's no DS algo test. All you need is your brain, is your hard work. And if somebody is really invested in C++, I would really recommend you to visit Xorg Endless Vacation of Code, because what it is basically GSOC without a timeline. You can apply to this program anytime, even today. You start by contributing to them, and it's the same way. You make a proposal, you submit it, and if they think that you're good enough, they'll take you in, and you have to work. They'll evaluate you continuously, and they'll pay you the stipend in installments, and there you have it. You have $5,000, and more than that, you have experience of contributing to Xorg, which is an amazing repository of C++ code. And if you don't know what Xorg is basically a display manager, and yeah, it makes applications, it makes programs related to desktop display managers and desktop environments related to Linux. So it's very core programming, and I think this link will be shared by somebody from the open source community. And this has a lot of other programs. If you look at the first link in this program, it's MLH, Major League Hacking, and it's really amazing that we have an MLH fellow with us here today, and he's Ayush. So that was my talk, and that was just some basic information about open source and Hacktoberfest. So I hope you liked it, and I'll hand over to Prashant again.
Thank you, Utkarsh. You added a lot of things and gave a brilliant overview of all these opportunities in open source. And we have Ayush Jain with us. He's Major League Hacking Fellow, and he will be talking about about other opportunities in open source and how you can make meaningful contributions this Hacktoberfest. So over to you, Ayush.
Hi Prashant, am I audible first of all?
Yes, you are audible.
Great, let me share my screen now. I hope my screen must be visible by now. And so, hey everyone, Did you enjoy the last talks about version control, open source, and from Jan and Utkarsh? Because I sure as hell did. And now let's consider that in an ideal world, you know all about Git commands, how to use GitHub. Would this be enough for you to contribute? Or there is a missing piece in the puzzle? Well, don't you worry. I'm here to help you finish this puzzle we call as open source. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Ayush Jain, undergrad at IIITU, maintainer at Connectivity, and just a regular open source enthusiast. So, it's so great to see you all here today, and so let's get started. So, first topic of my discussion today is how to make an impact with open source, not just contribute it, how to make meaningful contributions to open source. And before really beginning with the topic, I'd like to give you a puzzle. A puzzle that kept me thinking a lot in the recent year, that what do people get to work in open source? And by people, I mean everyone that is involved. It includes maintainers, it includes contributors, even the sponsors of the open source projects. So think more about it, and we'll come back to this in a few more minutes by the end of the discussion, and where I'll be taking suggestions from you and giving out my own. So after this, now I'm sure that you must be pumped up by now that about contributing to open source, and you're really excited. Like, let's get started to open source. But let me tell you what open source is about before beginning to contribute. So it is about where did you contribute rather than how much. It is about how many people you have rather than how many stars you got on your repo. It is about what problem you solved rather than how many commits you made. And it is about how you communicate rather than how much work did you get done. Maybe it is hard to understand now, but let me go through each of these points. So is it, is the data visible for? I think I can see it.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, great, great. So yeah, let's go on. So contribute versus how much. So to bring up this point, I have a repository where I contributed, and that is so these are the pull I made to React Native repo during my work at MLH. Some of them are closed, some of them are still open. It takes a lot of time to get them merged, and so you can see almost 10 to 12 PRs here. And this is one single PR that is still open, and one important PR that has been merged, this initial Gen one, and this is the PR I made to React Native website. So what do you think is more meaningful to open source? I'll show you what contribution I made in this PR versus this PR. So let's pick up a random one. In this PR, what I did was just update the documentation. It's a huge changelog, but what I need to say is anyone can do this work. This is mostly, this work can be replicated. And so I have almost around 10, 11 PRs here of such work. But this PR here in the React Native website repo, this is a contribution which is more meaningful to open source because it solves a problem that Facebook team is facing day to day. So what's so different in this PR? I did a script to automate the documentation process. I hope you are able to get what I'm trying to say. We at MLH solved a particular problem that was revolving around Facebook team and bothering them. Rather than just solving a series of small problems that can be. So this is how what I mean when I say where do you contribute rather than how. And coming to the next point, it is how many people you have rather than how many stars you have. So So I see a lot of people pushing raw algorithms on GitHub, and there's nothing wrong about it. But let me show you how to do it that right. I have an example. Just let me fetch that link with. So this is a link of coding interview. It has 137,000 stars. And why do you think that it has so many stars? Because it, instead of pushing raw algorithms, code forces solutions, this person really compiled a whole guide for people who are coming to learn about algorithms and data structures, and help them crack the coding interviews for university interviews. So you can see there's a huge readme with detailed, excellent video sources and so on. So what I mean is you should adding more context to it when you are uploading a GitHub, when you are uploading something to GitHub. Coming on to the next thing, what problem you solved versus how many commits you made. So many times it is considered that a repository with lot of commit is more meaningful than a repository with less commit. So let me give you an example. I build I can compare two of my projects, uh, but there are many more. So in one I have almost 100 or 150 commits, but it was a simple block while I was learning. Recently, connectivity, which has just around 50 or 60, and but it solves an actual problem. It helps people. So that is a meaningful contribution, and that is how you give back to the community. This is what you should keep in mind while contributing to open source. Are you doing some meaningful contribution that actually help people? So yeah, it has the 66 commit, but it's more meaningful contribution in terms of all other projects. Now, the last point about of what open source is about is how you communicate, rather than how much work did you get done. So many people think is like sitting in a dark room in a corner and committing thousands of lines of code is what people expect you to do. But generally, that's not true. People expect you to communicate well. That is, explain what you have done, even if you have done something very little. And also, your code is as good as your documentation is. If you have if you have built a project without a documentation, let me tell you, it's useless unless you are working alone on it. So good documentation, talking to maintainers, uh, communicating well throughout your team, sharing requirements, all that counts in how well you communicate. And this is the most important part of open source, that is communication. Coming on to the next thing is, okay, so yeah, so let's find where to get started. Like I receive a lot of questions like, how do you get started with open source? Where to find the starting point, where to contribute, and what to do and what not. So I can categorize this into three parts. That is beginner, medium, and pro. For beginners, I would say start with something simple rather than going to a huge mono repo and trying to understand the whole code, which is kind of a mistake I did initially. The thing is, start with something simple. Just for an example, there is a new community called Salescast. I discovered recently. It is based on the Sales.js framework of Node, and this is a very small community, like of 20-30 people. Try to find such communities or such small projects. Other example is my own project, Connectivity. Only like I have only like 6 or 7 contributors. So it is important to get visible. when with open source, because if you go to huge organizations like Mozilla or Photoshop, you won't get recognized. Most of your contributions would be like get lost in the pool of huge commits rather than making an impact. So for beginners, this is it. Like find the simple project where you can start contribution and try to work on that. For medium, like if you have like a few contributions in the past and now you are still you think you haven't got enough out of open source, start working on big repos, but the repos that require contributors, not the ones that have large number of contributors, just like React or React Native. These have like plethora of contributors, so don't go there. Start with something that interests you, and second, requires contribution. Some examples I included. For JavaScript, you can go to Next.js and getby.js. These are a few repositories that are currently in trend, and if you start contributing to these are in initial phases, and they would get huge in upcoming time, and then your recognition would be then your contribution will be recognized. And similarly, for Python, you can go to Palettes. It's a huge collection of repos like Django and all. So yeah, for medium level expertise people, try to contribute where contributors are welcome. For people who think they have contributed enough to the open source, and you have got enough out of open source, you know how it works. It's time to give back. So I would recommend start maintaining your own project. Find a problem, solve it, start learn about best open source practices, learn in public, make your idea public, and start maintaining your own project. Well, a lot of people I've known maintain their own projects, and there is a huge community around them. So this is a way to like get most out of the open source while giving back to the people. Now coming to best practice, I'll rather show you how to do these things. Like first is read readme. Like don't before reading the whole readme, because there are a lot of things you must learn before like sending your app and bothering the maintainers, because they might get rejected. So how do you read a readme? Like first you have the whole brief about what the project does, and you should have idea what the project does before getting involved. If the idea excites you, only then you should go ahead. Then most of the readmes you would find a getting started, which would involve prerequisites and usage. Prerequisites are just the things you might have in your system before getting started and using the thing. And for usage, most you just have to follow through whatever is written. In a good README, you will never face any difficulty when you are working on when you are trying to use a project. So this is the steps. If you are to recreate everything out of it, and if it does work, you can learn about some maintain like to add how does it work kind of thing. That means what is the basic workflow of the repo. So read that as well. Features, caveats, check for license if the project is licensed under license like MIT or GPT as well. Then this is very important, like contributing.md. Most of the good open source projects you would find contributing.md, or at least contributing section in the README itself. Visit the contributing MD, read what they have to say, what are their own guidelines. Like this is a very small project, so you won't face much difficulty while starting with your contributions for the first time. But when you go to big projects like Facebook, you will find a huge amount of work to be done before even getting started. So read about the contributing standards of the repo, maintain those standards. If they say title of the PR should be as such. We follow the standards, then follow the standards. That is how you get started contributing to the open source. So this is about reading through the README and learning about how to. Yeah, one thing I did was the code of conduct as well, because don't be disrespectful to anyone. Don't be impatient when you are contributing, because most of the maintainers are busy and they are doing it out of their free time. And so please read the code of conduct. That is very important. Then filtering issues by label. This is one of the best practices if you are getting started with the open source. So how do you find your first project? So if you are looking for a project, you can go either to explore section. There are lots of projects in this already, and you can even use the filtering mechanism of the GitHub. Just like these are the trending repos. I would use English as a language, and then the programming language you want to contribute to. Let's suppose, don't be restricted to the programming language you know. Let's suppose you want to learn Python, then start contributing to repos that use Python and learn Python by meanwhile. That is the way open source works. You learn while contributing. So I'll apply the JavaScript filter, and these are some of the trending JavaScript repos currently. But before starting to contribute, there are some things you should look at. Look about the deal. For example, you should see how many stars the repo has. Don't go start contributing to Freecode Camp directly. If you haven't contributed much to open source, practice in smaller repos. Like this repo has 730 stars. Let me just open it. Well, I don't know what this is about, but this seems like some type of funny repo. So you can start your contributions with some such repos, like where you have moderate amount of stars, not like very less, because otherwise the idea interests you. It doesn't matter if there are stars or not. And just check for if the repo has issues. So this repo has a lot of issues, but I don't see any label. You can apply label filter here. Most of the repos you would find good first issue label, like this one. So this is my own repo, and you can see there is good first issue label. Go to good first issue label, and you see there are 4 of the issues that need contribution. You can pick up anyone, and things to notice is assigned to anyone. It is not assigned to anyone, but then you read there is someone interested in working in this. So try to avoid repos that someone is already working on, because the chances are that maintainer would prefer the one who came first, and unless you have better ideas than the people. So comment on these, like this is the one that is no comment at all. The newly added function. Yeah, you can start contributing by any similar issue. Type your what do you think about, how do you think you can solve this problem. Type in a comment and then ask maintainer to assign yourself and start contributing. This is the way generally open source works. So filtering issues by labels and joining the community. Most of the communities of open source are on either Slack, Git, or Gitter, or some Discord. Yeah, join the community. Most of them you would find that in the README as well. So let's suppose you are checking out some repo, and if you scroll through this, you will find a community section, and there you can find where the community lies. Discord has whole lot of communities. I have added links to my I'll share with you later. And after joining the community, discuss with the maintainers what are the problems they are trying to solve, get involved and talk and communicate as well. Learn new things while contributing. This is the point I already discussed. Whatever you want to learn while contributing. So one thing I would like to bring up is use issues for discussion. It's very important. Like when you open an issue, make sure to say everything. Do your research. Do your research because that provides a source of authenticity. For example, I found a problem, and I checked out everything that is related to that problem and summarized that everything with link on the GitHub issue. Then we had some discussion, and then we took it online. I mean offline, apart from the GitHub. This is the way you start an issue and discuss with the maintainer. Similarly, when you create a PR, adding explanation is so important when you work with large repos. Just to show you, I have this whole summary, and then review your own code. When you create a PR, start reviewing your own code. It gives a good impression to the maintainer that you are serious about something, and most importantly, it gives like you have done all of your research and you are aware what problems are facing. And it helps maintainers to browse through everything faster. For example, I made this change and then I asked the maintainers that would this change be enough? I specified my approach as well as I specified the alternatives. And then a comment and I resolved the review. So this is how you can get faster replies from the maintainer. For example, this is one of the largest ones I had. So I did a lot of research, took out uh, some time, like around 2 to 3 hours, did research how can this functionality be improved or what else we can try, everything, all the discussion. And then you start getting good feedback, like thanks for the thorough work. That's where you make an impression. These are open source practices I personally think are really. And then now, yeah, let's get to the answer of the puzzle. Well, I'll suggest you to start putting your answers in the chat, and then I'll go through some of my own. So I hope Prashant can or someone can read out those answers for me.
It's not in the chat, but it's in another group that we have on WhatsApp. It's someone says that contributing to open source is more about solving a problem than I guess making big communities. And there's there's another answer that says that open source is about opening contribution to your code to the community so that it grows better. These were some of the answers that we had in our chat.
Yes, definitely. And so, okay, so I'll add more context to it now. So you can see this. What I find that answer to the puzzle, I asked initially that what do you think people get while contributing to open source? Why do they even contribute to open source? So the answer is first is recognition and visibility. When you contribute to open source, you are in an open field of possibilities. When you are contributing, people see your work, they recognize you. You start giving talks and conferences. You get you get to be known. You get followed by people, and that helps when you want to progress your career. Second is networking. You network with a lot of people. Most of the job opportunities you would get are by networking rather than cold emailing or directly applying to the jobs. So this is one of the main point of open source. Other point is you build a standout developer profile when you contribute to the open source. Next, build source for used by millions. This is one of the main reasons I contribute to open source, because the projects you contribute to would be used by millions of people, rather even if you know or not. For example, do you know that PlayStation uses BSD, that is an open source open operating system, as their kernel for Orbit OS? So think of the contributors of BSD. They have contributed to BSD, which is now being one of the most used gaming consoles, that is PlayStation. So sometimes you won't even know that how many people are using your contribution. Just like Jan told in his presentation. Apart from that, Jan also mentioned sponsors. So you can get GitHub sponsors, Buy Me a Coffee, and Patreon. You can just go to your GitHub, add these links to this. People pay if you are doing some nice work in open source. People like sponsor you a coffee, pay you through Patreon, and so on. So now that yeah, I have also added a few links for open source, and this is a repo that contains open source, lots of open source jobs. Once you start contributing to any of these repos, there are chances that the open source organization hire you as a full-time developer or something, whatever you are working on. So there are jobs in open source as well, and there are a lot like na10.io. There is Kubernetes and many more. Join the Discord community. Most meaningful communities are on Discord. You can see there is a list of communities, but there are a lot more. So there is Home Assistant, Ubik, Redux, Elixir, Jest, Facebook Jest. Every community, most of the communities are now on Discord, and you can see the number of members these communities have. For example, Flux community has around 127,000 members. So think of the vast community you would get to interact with when you join these communities. What comes next? I have added a link to my project. If you would like to contribute, if you are interested in contributing to JavaScript project. But there will be many more projects that Utkarsh or Prashant might share, and you can contribute to any of them. And yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you very much. Be a part of the community. Don't hesitate to ask for help.
Thank you, Ayush, for this great talk about how to contribute in an effective manner. Okay, so after all these talks are over now, so we have now 3 more weeks to go for the complete Hacktoberfest. So for this, we have an opportunity for you that we all can contribute to Hacktoberfest together to make this event more worthwhile for all of us. So first of all, I'd like to mention that all the resources that were used in this webinar will be shared on the GitHub repo that I just shared in the comment section, in the chat section. It will also be added to the description of the video, and all the presentations and all the links will be added to that repo. Then for the Hacktoberfest event that we are organizing, we would like you to join our Telegram community, whose link I've already added in the chat, and I'll also add in the description. So in the community, what we'll be doing the next 3 weeks is that we'll be sharing some links to you, some open source communities which are not too big or which were started by our own friends. Maybe some of these repos might have been made by Ayush or maybe by me. So we'll share those links and even share other communities links, some of maybe Jan's own repos, where beginners can contribute easily, so that we can all communicate together and finish this Hacktoberfest. And within the next 3 weeks before 30th October, you will have to complete the 4 PRs, and if you complete at least one successful PR, you will receive a certificate from Open Source Society UNA. So that's also a new incentive for this. And then the last thing that I'd like to say at the end of this webinar is that contributing to open source is tough enough, and please make sure that you are not making it tougher by different means, maybe by toxic comments on different open source communities, by creating unnecessary PRs, by creating unnecessary issues on different community repos. So yes, that's it. This wraps up our session. Thank you everyone for joining us, and please join our Telegram community for further events and further notifications.